Walk into a millennial's apartment, and you'll likely notice something immediately. Not the furniture, not the walls. You notice the plants. Everywhere. On shelves, hanging from ceilings, crowding windowsills, grouped carefully near light sources like they're attending a silent meeting about photosynthesis. Some are thriving. Some are barely hanging on. Some have names. This raises an interesting question. Why houseplants, and why this generation? Not pets, not elaborate decor, not expensive art. Plants. Living organisms that require just enough attention to survive, but not enough to overwhelm. This isn't random, and it's not just aesthetic. There's a psychological reason this particular attachment took root. At the surface level, people often explain it away as a trend, something about Instagram, interior design, or minimalism. But that explanation falls apart quickly. Trends come and go. This behavior has stayed, evolved, and deepened. The plant obsession isn't about how things look. It's about how things feel. Psychologically, houseplants serve as emotional regulation tools. They offer calm, structure, and a sense of progress in an environment where many traditional markers of stability are missing or delayed. For a generation that grew up during economic uncertainty, rapid technological change, and constant comparison, plants offer something rare, slow, visible growth that doesn't demand performance. Plants don't care about productivity. They don't reward hustle. They respond to consistency, patience, and basic care. Water them too much, they suffer. Ignore them too long, they suffer. There's no optimization trick, just balance. That alone makes them psychologically appealing in a culture obsessed with extremes. There's also something important about control. Humans are wired to seek environments where their actions lead to predictable outcomes. For many millennials, large areas of life, housing, careers, long-term planning, feel unstable or externally dictated. Plants, by contrast, offer a contained ecosystem. If the plant thrives, it's because of you. If it struggles, it's usually fixable. That sense of agency is subtle, but powerful. Interestingly, the attachment isn't usually dramatic. People don't describe plants as life-changing. Instead, they talk about them casually. They make the place feel better, or I just like having something alive around. But psychologically, that's exactly the point. Plants don't demand emotional intensity. They offer quiet reassurance. There's also a sensory dimension at play. Plants introduce softness into otherwise rigid environments. Organic shapes, irregular growth, natural textures. In urban spaces dominated by straight lines, screens, and artificial lighting, plants disrupt visual monotony. Studies in environmental psychology consistently show that exposure to natural elements reduces stress, lowers mental fatigue, and improves mood. Even simulated nature has measurable effects. A living plant in a room subtly shifts how the space is experienced. Plants are often treated like responsibilities, but very carefully chosen ones. They require care, but not emotional reciprocity. They can be neglected for a few days without consequence. They don't leave. They don't judge. They don't escalate conflict. From a psychological standpoint, plants occupy a low-risk attachment category. They allow people to practice nurturing without the vulnerability that comes with relationships, pets, or long-term commitments. This doesn't mean millennials are avoiding responsibility. It means they're selectively choosing manageable responsibility. A plant dying is disappointing, not devastating. A plant thriving is satisfying, not overwhelming. The emotional stakes are intentionally calibrated. There's also something symbolic happening beneath the surface. Plants grow slowly. They don't rush. They don't compare themselves to other plants. In a world where progress is measured in metrics, updates, and visible success, plants operate on a different timeline. They quietly suggest that growth doesn't have to be loud to be real. And perhaps most importantly, plants introduce continuity. Even when everything else feels temporary, jobs, apartments, plans, plants mark time. New leaves appear, old ones fall, seasons change. They give visual proof that time is moving forward in a non-threatening way. That's deeply comforting to a generation often accused of being stuck, when in reality they are navigating delayed milestones in a rapidly shifting world. So when someone fills their home with plants, it's not just about taste. It's about creating a livable psychological environment, one that feels calmer, more controllable, and more alive than the outside world often does. To understand why houseplants became such a defining feature of millennial spaces, you have to look less at personality and more at environment. Not the poetic kind, literal living conditions, economic structures, and the quiet psychological effects of growing up in a world where permanence became rare. Most millennials came of age during a time of instability. Housing prices rose faster than wages, career paths became nonlinear, long-term security shifted from expectation to exception. As a result, many millennials live in temporary spaces, rented apartments, shared homes, short-term leases. These environments shape behavior in subtle ways. When you don't own your space, you don't invest in it the same way. You can't knock down walls, you can't redesign layouts. Even hanging a picture may feel like overcommitment. But humans still need to personalize territory. Psychologically, creating a sense of mine is deeply tied to safety and identity. Houseplants offer an elegant solution: personalization without permanence. Plants don't damage walls. They don't require approval. They can move with you. In this sense, plants become portable stability, something consistent that survives relocation. When everything else resets every few years, the plant comes along, carrying continuity across chapters of life. Economic pressure also matters. Traditional symbols of adulthood, homes, property, long-term investments, are financially inaccessible for many. But the psychological need behind those symbols hasn't disappeared. People still want to care for something, grow something, and feel a sense of progress. Plants meet this need at a manageable scale. They're affordable, gradual, and forgiving. This is not accidental. Humans naturally adjust their aspirations to match what feels achievable. When large goals feel out of reach, the mind gravitates towards small, controllable systems that still provide meaning. Watering a plant, watching it grow, adjusting its position near light, these acts produce feedback. They reassure the brain that effort still leads somewhere. Urban living reinforces this pattern. Many millennials live in cities where access to nature is limited. Concrete, noise, screens, and artificial lighting dominate daily life. Environmental psychology shows that even minimal exposure to natural elements improves emotional regulation and cognitive clarity. Plants act as micro-nature, small but powerful reminders of organic life in otherwise manufactured environments. Importantly, this isn't nostalgia for forests or farms. It's regulation. The nervous system evolved in natural settings, not digital ones. When deprived of greenery, the body subtly stays on edge. Plants soften that edge. They reduce sensory overload without demanding attention. You don't interact with them constantly, but their presence matters. Another key factor is generational conditioning. Millennials were the first generation to grow up fully immersed in digital spaces. Screens became default environments for work, socializing, entertainment, and identity formation. While technology increased efficiency, it also removed tactile feedback from many areas of life. Plants restore physical interaction, touching soil, trimming leaves, noticing growth. These small sensory experiences ground the mind in the present moment. There's also a psychological contrast happening. Digital life is fast, quantified, and performative. Growth online is measured in likes, views, and algorithms, often unpredictable and externally controlled. Plant growth, by contrast, is slow and honest. No hacks, no virality, just time and care. This makes it emotionally stabilizing in a way digital rewards often are not. Responsibility plays a role here too, but a very specific kind. Millennials are often portrayed as avoiding responsibility, but this misses the nuance. What they avoid is irreversible, high-risk responsibility in an unstable world. What they embrace is responsibility with flexibility. Plants fit this perfectly. They allow caretaking without the fear of long-term failure. This is why plant care is often ritualistic. Morning watering, checking soil moisture, rotating pots toward the sun. These routines create rhythm in lives where external schedules can feel chaotic. Ritual doesn't require belief, it requires repetition, and repetition soothes the nervous system. There's also a quiet social layer. Plants have become a form of nonverbal identity signaling. They communicate values without explanation: calmness, intentionality, growth, self-sufficiency. Unlike luxury items, plants don't signal wealth. Unlike minimalism, they don't signal detachment. They signal care, measured, realistic care. And because plants are universally understood, they create low-pressure connection. Talking about plants is safe. It's neutral. It avoids ideology, status competition, or confrontation. In a polarized world, plants are emotionally neutral ground. All of this creates a feedback loop. Economic constraints shape living environments. Environments shape psychological needs. Psychological needs find expression through accessible tools. Over time, those tools become cultural markers. The obsession isn't forced. At a certain point, houseplants stop being objects and start becoming identifiers. People don't just own plants, they become plant people. This shift is subtle but psychologically revealing. When something moves from decoration to identity, it's usually because it fulfills a deeper emotional or symbolic role. For many millennials, plants symbolize growth without pressure. They grow slowly, unevenly, sometimes unpredictably, and yet growth still happens. There's no deadline, no comparison, no public scoreboard. In a culture where personal progress is constantly measured and displayed, plants offer a version of growth that feels private, forgiving, and real. This is important because identity formation doesn't happen in isolation. It responds to cultural conditions. Millennials are often navigating delayed timelines, later career stability, later home ownership, later traditional milestones. Plants quietly counteract the internal narrative that says, "You're behind." Every new leaf is a reminder that development doesn't have to follow a standardized schedule to be valid. Plants also provide a safe container for nurturing instincts. Caring for something living activates empathy, responsibility, and patience. But unlike relationships or pets, plants don't demand emotional availability. They don't escalate conflict. They don't mirror stress back at you. From a psychological perspective, this makes them ideal for people who are emotionally aware but cautious. Individuals who want connection without depletion. This is why people talk to their plants, apologize to them, or feel genuine guilt when one dies. The plant becomes a projection surface, not in a delusional sense, but in a symbolic one. The care given to the plant often reflects care people are learning to extend to themselves. Regular watering, better placement, adjusting when something isn't working. These behaviors mirror internal self-regulation, even if no one consciously frames it that way. There's also an important theme of stability without permanence. Plants stay long enough to matter, but not long enough to trap. They grow, but they can also be given away, moved, or replaced. This reflects a generation that values flexibility. Commitment isn't avoided, it's carefully scaled. Plants fit into that philosophy seamlessly. A particularly telling detail is how people respond to struggling plants. Instead of discarding them immediately, many research, troubleshoot, and adjust. New soil, different light, less water, more patience. Psychologically, this reflects a mindset shaped by problem-solving rather than abandonment. The plant becomes a small, contained system where effort still feels worthwhile. Plants also soften self-judgment. Unlike many aspects of modern life, they don't invite harsh evaluation. If a plant grows slowly, it's normal. If it loses leaves, it's seasonal. Failure isn't final. This stands in sharp contrast to digital spaces where mistakes feel permanent and visible. In this sense, plants act as counterweights to perfectionism. Another layer is the symbolism of aliveness. Plants quietly confirm that life is happening around you. They change, even when you're not paying attention. In periods of emotional numbness or burnout, something millennials report at high rates, plants offer gentle evidence of vitality without requiring energy in return. They're present, not demanding. Identity-wise, plants also allow people to express values without confrontation. Environmental care, mindfulness, simplicity, sustainability. These ideas are communicated indirectly. You don't need to explain them. The plants do the talking. This makes them especially appealing in a generation tired of loud signaling and constant explanation. Importantly, this obsession isn't about replacing human connection. It's about regulating emotional bandwidth. Plants don't compete for attention. They coexist. They occupy space without overwhelming it. In a world where attention is constantly pulled outward, this quiet presence is psychologically grounding. So when millennials fill their spaces with plants, they aren't trying to prove something. They're responding to conditions, economic, environmental, emotional, with something that makes sense. Something living, slow, adaptable, and forgiving. Something that grows without demanding justification. Houseplants, in this context, aren't a trend or a quirk. They're a reflection of how people build meaning when traditional structures feel unstable. They show how identity adapts, not loudly, not dramatically, but gently, leaf by leaf, in rented rooms and changing lives. And perhaps that's the most telling part of all.